Aha.
Ah, That's our
Frontiersman Sullivan.
Yes.
I think that's that's a good.
I think we're either frontiersmen or we're zoners. I think there's probably probably one of those languages, depending on who your relationship is with the other person. There's a different greeting that's actually used.
I think you might be right.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, I had a great week. I mean, it was, what a great experience. I'm just, I don't even know where to start. But I'll tell you, my mind is buzzing with free zone frontier thoughts.
But maybe we can start by letting our listeners know who didn't have the week with us.
I know.
The week was with us.
I keep forgetting that we're having, this is not just for us. That's so funny. Somebody said that to me, that they said, I love listening to your podcast, or he said more like listening in on your conversations. That's really what it comes down to. So, yeah, I just got back from Chicago, spent a few days, did 2 workshops, did my Free Zone Frontier workshop with with the alternate group. I really like that smaller environment. It was very nice, because first time I'd been to that group, and then got to sit in for half day of the 10 times group the day after, and met some new people and got to see some familiar faces. But it was exciting times, because this concept, I think, Dan, you are sharing with you in Chicago, the 3 books of Who Not How, the Free Zone Frontier, and the Who Do You Want to Be a Hero To?
Want to be a hero to.
Those 3 books, Dan, are those the last 3 in order?
Yeah, the first one was Who Not How, then Who Do You Want to Be a Hero To, and then Free Zone Frontier, and they kind of build on each other. I mean,
they really do. I mean,
and it takes you to, it's almost like each one of them is kind of a hill you're climbing. You get an idea at the bottom of the hill, and you climb, and at the top you got a new concept, and then you notice that there's a playing field at the top of the next hill, and you go there to play. And it gives you another idea, and then there's another hill. So it's a series of terraces, actually. You're kind of moving up, but you get the benefit of the 3 climbs when you get to the third one. You don't leave behind what you've left. You actually bring the value of it with you. And I'm a great believer in. I mean, I didn't have this word. This is a word that has come to my attention. In 2016, 2015, this idea of stacking, that when you have capabilities, you may not have the best particular of that capability, but if you add it to another capability, and if you add it to another capability, you get a compounding effect. The capabilities actually might, And where I got that was from Scott Adams, the Gilbert cartoonist, and right out of the blue, in the late summer of 2015, he has this podcast which I watch frequently. I don't watch it every day, but I watch it frequently. It's called Coffee Time with Scott Adams, and he
synchronized with the simultaneous sip.
Yes, the simultaneous sip. And the thing about him is he just came out and he predicted. He says, based on everybody I see, Hillary Clinton, obviously on the Democratic side, but now 17 individuals competing on the Republican side, it's clear cut to me that Donald Trump is going to win the nomination, and then Donald Trump up against Hillary Clinton is also going to win the election. And he says it's because he has the most powerful stack of persuasive skills of any of the candidates. And he said, I have to tell you, I'm a lifetime Democrat. And he said, he said, actually, I'm not going to tell you who I'm going to vote for, but he said, I'm a lifetime Democrat. So I'm not saying this as someone who's biased toward the Republican Party, but he said, if you just realize that in today's world with social media, the cloud, as you will, that the person who has the greatest number of persuasive skills, that they've integrated into a stack. That's the word that I've really been impressed with, stack. And that you can, if you had one skill and you were up against someone else who has that skill, they might have a better skill. And you could take any one of the skills you have and you're up against someone else. But they might just rely on that skill, but you stack 5 or 6 skills. He said the person with the most persuasive skills stack will win in today's 24-hour news cycle. And
yes.
So my feeling is that in coach, and this goes back to strategic coach, without me knowing this, we're at the end of our 30th year of developing strategic coach thinking tools in large numbers. And when I look at these tools, which are just really, really designed for outlier entrepreneurs, this is the only thing that I'm designing these tools for. An outlier entrepreneur is, first of all, someone who's an entrepreneur, but they're an outlier. They became an entrepreneur because they were an outlier. They didn't want to work for someone else for the rest of their life, so they went out into their own in the marketplace and took their chances. But what allows them to actually make progress in their entrepreneurial career, even when they're inexperienced and even where they don't really have a full grasp on the business arena that they've gotten into, nevertheless, they're an outlier, so they have a tendency to actually develop unique skills. They have a nose for the unique, they have a nose for the unusual, they have a nose for the undeveloped, and so they go after that thing. Well, when you get to the level of workshop participants that were there when you were there on Thursday and Friday, Dean, they're a long way from being an entrepreneur, and a lot of them are a long way since they started Strategic Coach. And everybody in the room has developed 8 particular tools. And so with this idea that in every one of these tools, there's an advantage that you would have that would make you immune to competition from the outside. That would be with any one of the tools, but if you put the 8 tools together, then you have a compounding exponential advantage over any potential competitor. So that's my basic thing. And I think when people realize that, they say, I really do. I really do. So I wasn't telling them something that's going to happen. I just reminded them of something that actually has happened.
Yeah, right. And that's amazing, right? I mean, you think about Scott's prognostication about that early. He was really kind of an outlier in that thinking initially, as nobody was really expecting that too. And then it plays out. And we're seeing it now. You're able to predict, and we're able to see the entrepreneurs that are succeeding with their stack of skills, the stack of abilities is really, there's never been a better opportunity for us than now.
And the other thing is that regardless of what happens, so people say, well, you never know how the economy is going to go. You don't know, what kind of technological change. I said, doesn't matter. Whatever happens, they'll use their skills to create an advantage in the marketplace in a way that their competition won't. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest thing. There's a high degree of predictability, not so much on what their outcomes are going to be, but there is a high degree of predictability on how they're going to handle anything to actually produce a favorable outcome for themselves.
And, it was so funny along the lines of your eyes only see and your ears only hear. What your brain is looking for is this. I was sharing with you that recently I've discovered some things that Charles Koch had said. Koch, one of the Koch brothers, David just recently died, but Charles Koch is the head of now the Koch Industries, $100 billion guy. I think he's fifth or sixth richest guy in the world right now. And when he took over his largest privately owned company in the world. That's it. Okay, there we go. Perfect thing. Just he and his brothers own the company. And when he took over, they were already wealthy, as he said. He took over, as a 26-year-old, his family company, and it was worth $21 million in 1961. And they've ushered through a 5,000-fold increase over that period of time.
Yes.
And to hear him describe the methodology and the way that they went about it was really, you're seeing these concepts, these concepts peeking out almost exactly the way that we talk about them. The idea of who do you want to be a hero to, and unique ability, and the his approach. As I heard him describe it, and I've never heard him speak before, but the way he described it was his method is to develop capabilities and unique capabilities, they said, to produce a result for other people, which was a really, that's an interesting thing when you're saying,
and I think,
who do you want to be a hero to?
Just for, to provide a context, Dean, you just started off with his pipelines before there's oil.
Right. I'll definitely tell that story, because this is kind of laying the setting stage for that this ability to get results for other people, which was an interesting thing, not just develop skills, but develop an ability to create results for other people, which led me to think, who do you want to be a hero to? Being outwardly focused on what does the marketplace need? Who can I do that with? And then seek out partners, people to partner with, who will allow you to execute your unique capability on their behalf, and allow you to participate in the benefit that you can create together, which is the free zone frontier, really, right? And so he described as a lot of the things that they do are petroleum-based products, which require a lot of oil. They're an oil refiner, basically. And so they have to constantly get new oil. And he took an approach of, when companies were drilling for oil and exploratory drilling for oil, he would go to them and say, thinking from their perspective, right? Thinking about them is, who do you want to be a hero to? That as soon as they strike oil, they're going to want to commercialize that as quickly as possible. Now, most other companies would be waiting until they strike oil and then approaching them and saying, oh, let us build the pipeline. Oh, let us build the pipeline for you, right? We'll buy your oil. And he was saying, let's go ahead and, in the interest of time, let's build the pipeline now in case they strike oil. And when they do, we'll be able to help them commercialize it right away, faster.
Yes.
And we'll take on the expense of doing that, and we'll do the stuff and get them to agree to sell us the oil when they do. And of course, everybody was completely amenable to that, and that was how they got it. And he said it was really interesting to see that when they would do that, and then as soon as they would strike oil, then all these other companies would come and say, oh, let us build the pipeline. We'll do it cheaper than they will. And they would say, no, we're good. And I thought that the image that brought up for me was, all these companies, it's almost like the hound dog pack is waiting for them to strike oil, and then everybody's gonna, all of a sudden descend into town and start whining and dining and pitching and trying to get somebody selling people pipelines, right? Getting them to buy their pipelines. And it struck me as a concept that I had been developing, that every person in an organization is 100% authorized to bring money into the business. But there's only a handful of people who are allowed to take money out of the business. And everybody's competing for the money going out of the business, almost like they're all gathered around the shipping dock, waiting to fight for the scraps of the money in the budget that's going to be allocated. And yet, if you go and you walk around behind the building and approach from the receiving dock, there's no competition at the receiving dock. They're welcoming at the receiving dock. They're, right this way. What have you got for us? And they're 100% delighted to see somebody at the receiving dock. And I thought, that's really an interesting metaphor, just to think about how can you position yourself to approach through the receiving dock and not wait and fight it out at the shipping dock, waiting for the crumbs,
Well, one thing, right in our Free Zone Frontier program, one of our participants, Chip Mock from Detroit, without knowing that this was going to develop, he created a cure for a disease that has not been cured in 130 years. It's been maintained, it's been managed, and it's out of control varicose veins in the lower leg. He's a plastic surgeon, so that's been a problem that's been solved in beauty parlors, which are the surgery centers that are mostly cosmetic surgery. But a great number of people, 97% of Americans, are untreated for this. They either do the disease management or they just live with it, and it hastens death because it creates open sores and infections. So anyway, he solves this, and he's now developing centers all over the United States that cure this. And once he did that, all of a sudden he noticed that there was a buildup in the healthcare industry of people who had created cures, but the healthcare system really isn't interested in cures. They're interested in the diseases that don't cure but can be managed. So, so it's not a healthcare system, for the most part, it's a disease management system because there's a lot of money in managing a disease over a long time, but never
recurring revenue. Yeah.
Yeah. And the only part of cure that the healthcare cure that the healthcare industry wants here is recurring revenue. That they like recurring revenue. So what he's found is that all of a sudden he's solved a very major problem for all the innovators around the world who have created legitimate cures, but they can't get in the front door of places that just want to have disease management techniques and processes, and pharmaceuticals that go along with that. So the interesting thing is that he's kind of creating a pipeline. If you think of his network of centers, and he plans to have 300 or 400 of these, and he's creating the centers where this person who's innovating something, there's already a network to go into. He doesn't have to knock on the door and try to get it into one center.
Oh, so now they can do other diseases or other things.
Yeah.
Smart.
And so he's created a capability that solves their problem. In other words, it's just really interesting. A lot of people don't know this, but Sears and Roebuck used to have housing kits that they could deliver, 100 years ago, being, probably 1920s or so. And they had a catalog, and there, be 25, 30 different kind of house designs, sizes, styles. And they had contractors who would build these kits, and everything was, templated. Every part had to be right. They had specifications for all the parts, and they all had to be numbered, and then they had to be packed in a certain way in big cartons and containers. But you would order a kit, and 2 weeks later, it would be delivered to your town by train. And all you needed to do was get local carpenters to follow the rules, and then they could build your house. They could build your house for you. And there's thousands of these across the United States. Most of them are historic houses now, so they're protected. But they created a free zone frontier. Think of the free zone frontier that they created. They created it for the, house builders who might just be a local house builder. But they said, if you're a real good house builder, then we want you to build these kits. We don't want you to build houses. We want you to build kits. So we just want you to make sure that all the parts are, it'd probably be a woodworking factory, actually. It wouldn't be a builder. But then you had lots of local carpenters who could get into the network of carpenters who built these houses.
The house assembly process, right?
Yeah, and then Sears would let each community know where they could find these carpenters who got very, very good at this. So these carpenters might start off in one town, but then they just follow the Sears building kit network, and they would get on jobs and everything like that. This is 100 years ago. Years ago. So this free zone frontier actually, operates. The big one, of course, and repeated, is the Cyrus McCormick, because he's considered one of the three greatest technological innovators of the who propelled the American economy during the 1800s.
Yeah, and that was with the Reaper. Along with the telephone and the railroad, that was credited as one of the three greatest inventions of the 1800s. And you start, it's an interesting thing that ushered in that was a gateway to a new era. When you look at that really changed the makeup that, when you think about those three things, the railroad making us a mobile, the the telephone making us, be able to communicate through a distance, and the Reaper allowing the workforce to go out of the fields and into the factories. That really, you could see how that was such a catalyst, I just look at now.
The other thing I would say, Dean, is it allowed the farmers to have much bigger fields, and it allowed the spread of really
and a bigger market,
farms.
Right?
Yeah, to spread the bigger field farms straight across the country, maybe 20 or 30 years faster. So the whole development of the agricultural sector probably was speeded up,
Yeah.
And really wealthy farmers would have more than one reaper. They would maybe, if they had 1,000 acres or 2,000 acres, they'd have four reapers with four men and four horses, and that would be they would be able to produce what 56 other people in addition could produce. Yeah, so that's the
It's pretty amazing, and I look at that now. We see that now with the internet between this Cloudlandia and mainland intersection here that we're at, and you look at those kind of things, like what Chip is doing is, varicose veins are decidedly a mainland situation that you're going to have to get that treated on the mainland. But the network, that the ability to manage that is Cloudlandia enabled.
Yeah,
really, it's
very much so.
Something.
Yeah, and another one, I saw a play in London called the Lehman Trilogy, and Lehman refers to the Lehman Brothers, who became a very famous, investment bank in New York City. But the story goes, and it tells the story that these were three brothers who came from southern Germany in the 1830s, 1840s, and the first one came to New York and just felt that the competition and what they were clothiers. They produced clothes, they bought fabrics. So on a tip from someone he met there, he actually quickly moved to Alabama, and he set up in a small town in the middle of plantation territory. So this is before the Civil War. And he would provide clothing, work clothing, and, formal clothing and fabrics for the women and everything else, and set it up so it was Lehman. And then a second brother came over, and the sign changed and became Lehman Brothers, clothiers of fabrics. And then what he noticed was that, he would get to talk to the plantation owners, the workers, and there was the plantations were very poorly supplied with, these weren't real effective businesses. The plantations weren't really effective businesses. And so they were always lacking in tools, and they were always lacking in seeds. They didn't know anything about seeds and everything else. And then his second brother, he says, I think we ought to broaden our scope here. We've got a captive market. And there were about 25 big plantations. And you're talking about, half the state of Alabama was 25 plantations. And so what they did, they broadened it to hardware. It was basically general store. It was basically a general store. And so they had their clothing. They still had their clothing fabrics, but they added tools. And one thing led to another, and pretty soon they were a provider of all this stuff. And then there was a absolutely cataclysmic fire that swept over most of Alabama, and it burnt burnt all the fields, the cotton fields, just when they were about to, when they were about to come to harvest. And so there was no cash. So here they were. So they got this idea, and they'd been very frugal, and they had built up cash. They had cash confidence, and they did a deal with all the plantation owners that they would give them, like Cyrus McCormick, they would give them everything they needed for the next season, and they would get paid at the harvest. Okay, and they would get paid with part of the harvest. Okay, so this switched them from the money they got. So then they had to, one of the brothers, and by this time a third brother had come over, and the third brother said, well, I'll go and I'll take our share of the harvest and I'll find buyers. And what they found out right away is that even on their first trip, they were better able to find buyers for their payoff crop, the share that they got. Payoff crop, and they came up with the idea that they would be the seller for all the plantations. So they went around and they said, look, we've got a network of buyers, and we're going to specialize in this. You only do this once a year, and you don't know who's who, and you don't know a change, but we're going to keep them. And so they became buyers, and now they were back to New York and back to Massachusetts, because the big mills that actually turned the cotton into fabric and thread were in that area, so they got this connection, and then so they became cotton buyers and brokers. So look how they had moved. They had moved,
wow.
And in every case, they were seeing how they could be more valuable to the plantation owners. And then, in the 1860s, the war came. Civil War came along, and everything was gone. The plantations were gone. And immediately they just switched gears, and they started going to the Caribbean, and they became coffee brokers. And one thing led to another, and they started raising. You could invest in their company, and they would be a bank for other coffee brokers. So they kept moving upstream. You can see what they're doing here, and then eventually they just became bankers, and they were very agile at just seeing where the larger value proposition was, and everything. And they lasted right up until the collapse in 2008. So from the 1840s. To the downturn in the market. Lehman Brothers was the trigger point of the the crash in 2008, 2009. There were no Lehmans involved by that. The last one I think was gone. The last relative was gone about 20 years beforehand.
Wow.
Now, anyway,
was this
the whole point
documentary that you were watching, or did you read
it's a play? It's just opening in New York.
Okay.
It's really worthwhile. It's a really worthwhile play to see. We saw it in London. It opened, did their big testing in London. I think they had opened for about a week in New York, and then they switched to London, and we saw it. And it's just three actors. And they portray 25 different people.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
very,
amazing.
very good. Very, very good. But the big thing is that whole notion, specifically with Cyrus McCormick, of them seeing that the plantations had no ability to pay, so they just gave the capability to the plantations to, to actually stay in business, and then they got paid not only in cash, but they got paid in part of the crop.
But it's a really interesting thing, using the the whole being able to keep those things parlaying. I don't know much about about Charles Koch, but when you start thinking about how they didn't start out with 12 business divisions. They started out with one, and it was always at the adjacencies that they ended up finding the opportunities. And I think that it's like you said about the books, where when you read, who do you want to be a hero to, that then creates a vista that you see something else. You see who, not how, and you see then the free zone frontier.
Yeah. When you identify who you want to be a hero to, rather than you're thinking in terms, well, I've got a product and a service and I've got to find some customer. Well, that's a very, what I would say, procrastination friendly approach.
Right.
In other words, because you don't really have an emotional connection to any potential prospect out in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of reasons for you to procrastinate. But if you are emotionally committed to a particular type of person out in the marketplace, then it's not about the product or service. It's about that person's future and where they're trying to get to. And then you will create solutions, and some of them may be products, some of them may be services, but those are irrelevant. It's how you help the person who you want to be a hero to actually get to where they're going. And exactly with the oil well, he was anticipating where these, high-risk oil drillers, if they hit oil, what they were going to need next, and he made it an instantaneous solution. If you hit oil, the solution to get it to the market, we've created the solution.
Yeah, we already went ahead and built it. We knew you were.
Yeah, we already had.
Yeah, I mean that's. Yeah, and that. But the fact that there's the thing is that the hound dog pack of other vendors. I love that distinction that you've been making there. That the people who are positioning themselves as vendors are waiting until they strike oil to then go and say, because they're thinking, what have you got for me? What's in it for me is that I'm going to get to do your, build your pipeline. You're you're a client, a prospect for us, as opposed to putting your selfish needs aside and realizing that, well, it's Zig Ziglar's approach of you can get anything you want in life if you help enough other people get what they want. Yeah. Conditioned precedent, right? Yeah. That's really the thing, is everybody thinks that it's that it's an indication that you need to hustle and work harder and help more people, but that it's conditioned precedent. It's you get them what they want, and then you get what you want through getting them what they want. And it's really getting that confidence. That's where you're saying, this is where it resonates so much, is your unique ability developing your ability, continuing to develop your ability, and your confidence in your ability, so that you're not really, you're not betting on them, you're betting on you and your ability to get the result for them.
Yeah. And I think there's two confidence that you have to have to even play this game. You have to have cash confidence. In other words, you have the cash that you can wait for a much bigger outcome. And
future,
I know entrepreneurs are very, very creative, but they never have cash confidence that they can bet on their new ideas. And the other thing is, it's an imaginative confidence that if I suspend my own self-interest and put my imagination on someone else's future and what they're going to need. So there's two things. There's cash confidence. I think there's imagination confidence that I'm taken care of cash-wise, and I'm also taken care of just in terms of that I know I'm really useful, and depending on what I can see in someone else's future, I can actually use my skills, first of all, for them, and then I'll get a reward for using my skills for them. So it's actually a two-type, and it's kind of like muscle. I use the word muscle. You got cash muscle and you got imagination muscle.
Yes, that's good. And I think what backs it all, though, is the capability muscle.
Yeah.
You've got, that's the baseline thing, that you've got the capability to do it.
Mm-hmm.
This is really, I mean, I just I feel, I was saying to Stuart today, we had breakfast, and I was just sharing how much buoyancy I'm feeling going into the 20s now. Like I really like the discrete packets of a decade, like a century kind of thing. I really love that we're coming into a decade of what now feels like the first like proper decade of the new millennium here,
Well, I think, just terms of what was happening before the beginning, 2010 would have been the beginning of the decade that we're just finishing up. And it was, the end of the first decade of the century was, a really, really scary, confusing time because of the crash, the 08-09 crash. And so it was mostly about, did you survive? And secondly, how do we recover from this right now? For most of the economy. Yeah. And that may not have been your particular situation, but you were dealing with a lot of other people that was their situation. Right now in the States, I've been coaching for 45 years, and I have never seen in my 45 years of coaching entrepreneurs the level of confidence at the local level right across the United States. I mean, there's corporations that are freaking out because of the readjustment of tariffs in the world. Yeah. But that really doesn't affect the entrepreneurs.
I wonder if what I'm observing, Dan, is that there are so many people right now that are poised and waiting for the downturn because they're looking at it as a good thing, a good opportunity for them, that's going to, I think, kind of slow the arrival of it. And I think it's going to soften the severity of it, because I think there's such a pool of people who've really taken advantage of this long growth period that we've had after the crash, and are waiting now for the opportunities that will come with a downturn.
Yeah. Well, it's really funny. We had, Roy, who comes from Singapore, in the workshop on Friday. And Roy's been coming for 5 or 6 years, and he represents a investment fund in Singapore that invests in American real estate, but specifically homes. I mean, that's been his specialty, is undervalued homes. And so he's done well. I mean, he's done really well, but he was sitting next to Ken Newman, who at one time was in the top 10 home builders in the United States, he got hit. I mean, his company got hit, but he didn't get hit because he had been wise about how he protected himself. And he flipped over to another particular, he does a whole bunch of things, but one thing that he does is that he looks for titled property that has not been serviced. Okay, so, and you'll know the deal because of your real estate development. Let's say there's farmland outside of Toronto. Yeah. And it's been titled, which means it's been totally approved for development. Yeah. And if tomorrow, if somebody wanted to, they could begin the process of servicing that property, putting in the electricity, putting in the, the water and everything else. So you're right at the threshold. But until that tomorrow happens, that land is still considered farmland. Okay, it's not considered development land. It's right there. So what Ken does, and Ken says this is the secret to real estate billionaires around the country. They just wait till a downturn when even the farmland is now selling at $1, but when the downturn comes, that farmland might sell for 10 cents, 10 cents an acre, or a dime. It will sell for a dime on $1, whatever it is that's being purchased. And he said his experience is that whatever he pays for it, 3 or 4 years later, he gets 15 times his investment on it. He was just informing that Roy. He says, since you're coming over here, he says, I know you're going to get a good return because, compared to Singapore real estate prices, American real estate prices are very cheap, and he didn't say free, but it is very, very cheap. The most expensive real estate property in the United States would probably not equal to the most expensive real estate price in Singapore. So anyway, but that just confirms what you were saying, that you just wait then for the downturn. I bet there's as much of an economy that takes advantage of downturns as there is that actually produces upturns.
Well, it's like you said, that everybody's bad news is somebody's good news, right? And that's really, we talked about Norman in North Carolina. There's everybody's
actually South Carolina.
In Aiken. And
so he comes. He comes to his dinner. So they've just been through 2 weeks of hurricane and its aftermath. And he's at dinner, and he says, I feel guilty saying this around home, but he says, I truly do enjoy a good hurricane. And and because he's got a waste management company, and there's big messes to clean up. But then he sells plywood, so every truck that goes to clean up a mess has a load of plywood because there's windows out, there's doors out, there's holes in the siding, there's holes in the roof, and your temporary solution to all that is you get plywood up right away as fast as you can. You use plastic, you use canvas and plywood to actually do a fast job, But then he's got restaurants and bars, and he said, well, people aren't eating at home, so where are they going to eat? He says they come to the restaurants, bar. He says, nothing like a great hurricane week.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Yeah, that whole, you look at the, the downturn. I remember in 2009, right when Obama was inaugurated, they launched the stimulus program and, offered two great things for real estate, one of which was an $8,500 tax credit for first-time home buyers, and that was to stimulate people, coming into the market. They could get the money back off of their taxes, not a tax deduction, a tax credit, and that was so it's like free money. And I built a whole program around that for our real estate agents with we put together a free tax credit guide and became an education provider for first-time buyers. And we've also created a program called Bank Owned Weekly, where we, would provide information on bank-owned homes and for buyers. And that was, there were people who had their best years in that downturn by providing for the people who were happy that the downturn had come. First-time buyers who didn't buy while the prices were going crazy and they got out of reach, now it's affordable for them. Or people who didn't buy the bigger house they wanted because the gap got too big between what their house and the bigger house they wanted was. So lots of, on every cloud has a silver, every dark cloud has a silver lining, I guess, right?
Yeah. And the thing that I find about that, and I'll just make reference to the bank-owned real estate. The last thing that any bank wants to own is somebody else's real estate.
That's exactly
their home,
right.
especially a private home. The last thing the bank wants to own is. So they'll go through hoops to help any realtor who will help them take that piece of property off their hands. I mean, they'll
exactly
facilitate the whole banking process. I mean, we want to sell this car and we'll give you a full tank of gas to take it off. We'll service it and everything to get it off your hands. And you see, the whole point is, it's not seeing yourself in a particular business. Is seeing yourself in a greater and greater stack of useful skills that help other people get on with their lives. It's really being your usefulness stack keeps getting bigger and better as you go along, and you're just useful. And that's really the whole key here. And, it's very, very interesting. And it's a thought that I had about 3 weeks ago. Just on this, everybody's good news is everybody else's bad news. That I have a book, one of my quarterly books in mine, and the big title is Relax, Everybody's Saving the World.
I like that.
Yeah, and the whole point is if there's downtimes, then the people who are taking advantage of the downtimes are saving the world. And then if there's uptimes, the people who are taking advantage of the uptime are saving the world. And it doesn't matter. It's a flip back and forth. So what looked like the worst news in the world, well, actually, skilled people are turning this into new advantages and new capabilities and new types of opportunities. Which the other people who are disadvantaged right now can take advantage. I mean, you just have to be flexible in your thinking and your, being willing to learn, new skills, new approaches, especially new mindsets as you go along. But the one thing I was really, really itching to ask you is to go back to our original thesis of procrastination. And just bounce it up against this whole concept of free zone frontier. What relationship does procrastination have to the free zone frontier? So the free zone frontier, I'll just leave it off with a destination for our listeners. A free zone frontier is where you are increasing your value creation collaborations in such a way that you create an entirely new kind of service or new kind of solution in the marketplace that's amazingly free of competition. In other words, you're taking advantage of something and creating something that the normal rules of competition, which trap people in their conventional way of thinking, is not available. And what I'm saying is, and here's my question, if you're in a free zone frontier, do you procrastinate at all?
I don't think this is where I'm finding that my ability to focus, I've got my remarkable tablet here, and I didn't share this with you, but I'm sharing it with you now, that I find that when I'm exploring in my on my remarkable here, when I'm going down the path of expanding my free zone frontier opportunities, that there I have endless focus and attention for this, where because it's like, I think it's free of friction too, is really the thing, that you're able to take your capabilities, you're able to just move forward on executing without having to get buy-in, or I think that's really the thing when you're thinking about if you're positioning as you've got this capability and then you're trying to find people to convince to work with you to get that result, where you're trying to get it, where you're trying to get them to buy into your idea, so that you're almost like they have to do something in a way. Whereas if you're just bypassing them in a way, and you go and you start moving towards the result that they actually want, that they're much more likely to join in on your enthusiastic pursuit of the result for them.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's energizing. There's no friction in that. There's no, so I look at that and I see these incredible opportunities like that. I was talking with Jay Abraham the other day, almost 2 hours. We talked about the arbitrage, words that he was using, the opportunities that are available for in this commoditized stage of execution. And I think I'm using that word. I said to Jay that we're certainly at a point right now where execution has become commoditized, and I'm saying I'm not using commoditized as a derogatory, diminishing way of talking about it. I'm talking about it as an opportunity, meaning the true definition of commoditized is something available that you can buy. And what I'm saying is you can buy execution of everything now. Just like in China, you can buy every electronic component that you would need to make anything in combination.
Yes.
Nobody's inventing. You don't need to invent anything new in electronics, really. It's all been solved and it's all available. That's why when you see Peter Diamandis showing, things about Shenzhen or wherever that marketplace is for all those electronics manufacturers, you can literally just go and combine this and this and this, and it's effortless to create things like that. And I think that in this free zone frontier, creating results is really the same way. Execution elements are commoditized, and I mean that in a joyful, positive way. Especially if you have money and the ideas. The ideas are really what is the driving of it.
Yeah. Well,
because even money's become commoditized.
Yeah. Well, it's cash confidence and innovation confidence, really.
Yeah.
That's really what you have. And but it's really, really interesting. And I know a good concept when I do it, because all of a sudden you can use it to look at all familiar situations and see entirely new things, and what were kind of conventional, familiar, habitual, repetitive situations. You say, oh my gosh, there's a whole new thing there that I never saw. I never noticed that doorway in the back of my closet, and I wonder what's behind the closet. And you open the door, and there was another 15 rooms in your house you never knew about.
Right. Well, look at this. Yeah.
I've been living in these 4 rooms, and I said, gee, I wish I had a bigger house. And then one day you say, I wonder what that door, and I never saw that door in the back of my closet. And I open it up, and there's 15 more rooms, but you weren't curious enough.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, one takeaway for you. One takeaway from it's always useful to to know what is better at the end of the hour than it was at the start of the hour.
Yeah. I think hearing these conversations and looking at the vistas of each one leading to the next, I think that's really, I think what we discovered here, the adjacencies, hearing you tell about the layman's and hearing, putting that aside or beside the Koch brothers, and you see that was really
Cyrus
McCormick, where that all
Sears and
Roebuck, wherever that leads. Yeah. What's the next book in the series, by the way?
The next one for December is Always Be the Buyer. Always be the buyer. And my definition of the difference between a buyer and a seller is someone who can be rejected.
Yeah.
A buyer is someone who does the rejecting.
I like that. Always be the buyer.
So I'll give you an example of, just to finish off, of the Koch brothers. They're in a position, yes, to go and say, look, we'll build the pipeline, but we're looking for, oil operations that we think will really fit in with our new pipelines. So do you have, the wherewithal to actually be, the oil explorer and developer?
Yeah.
To actually, we're going to have a wonderful pipeline. We just wonder if you're worthy of it.
Mm-hmm.
Koch brothers is selling nothing there. Koch brothers is the buyer.
Yes. It's so great. Yeah. And that really does. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. Very interesting. These are great times. Yeah. And then you've got
they're amazingly free of competition, because no other pipe developer is going to take that risk because they think they're sellers.
Right. Isn't that interesting? But they're aligning. When you think about it, this is what Stuart and I was talking about at breakfast this morning, that the oil companies are not going in to just randomly drill for oil anywhere. I mean, you think about the millions of dollars and time that they put in geologically to pick this area, and the millions of dollars that they're investing to actually do the drilling, that they're 100%, they're 100% committed that's where the oil is. So why not align with what they're taking the risk on? If you're aligning your risk to be rewarded along with them, it's pretty, a whole new world.
Yep. It's just a very interesting way of looking. And again, you can look at hundreds of businesses that already exist out there that have lasted a long time and have grown. And when you analyze, you'll be able to spot that they didn't succeed because they were a better competitor. They succeeded because they created free zone frontiers that their competition couldn't even comprehend.
I get it. Exciting times to be a frontiersman.
Yes, it is, a frontiersman. And you know something? Frontiersmen don't have to worry about their status. All they have to worry about is pushing forward.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I can't believe how fast these conversations go.
This one really went quickly. Yeah.
It did. Yeah. I will look forward to our next, as I always do.
Yeah, and that'll be next Sunday.
Perfect. Have a great week, Dan.
Thanks, Dean. Bye.
Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.